started out as a pharmaceutical business over 140 years ago. And now, recently, in the last 20 years, our energy business has been strong. So we've always been in infrastructure projects or businesses, whether it's healthcare that's going into transportation, telecommunication, big projects, and now energy being our biggest business. But industry is also an important part, whether it's equipment or services, and the healthcare equipment is still there. So it's really kind of a balance that's important to us.
You have several projects underway in development around Southeast Asia, particularly in Vietnam, but what about further afield?
We already had a power plant and a distribution system in Vietnam, and so we had experience in that country, which was very helpful, and we found partners that could help us introduce. So for us, it's always very important to also have recognize. There was an opportunity to get licenses for large solar parks, and we managed to get those, and so that made the expansion possible. And now we're also looking at the possibility of further expansion in the gas-fired power plant. We're looking to expand much further in Malaysia. We have a partner there that we're looking to do some interesting projects with. Korea, also very interesting. Basically, in all countries, we're looking at solar and wind. In Laos, we're very strong in, we only have water, so hydro. And Thailand is still expanding a lot as well. We're currently looking at very interesting projects in Eastern Europe.
With the target of being carbon neutral by 2050, does that mean that you're looking more in renewable projects or traditional power sources?
We keep on looking at gas, and we look very strongly at renewables because it's not only the trend, but also the future, and the technology is becoming cheaper. However, we also see that there's a big space still for hybrid I think the renewable power plants is also still very influenced also by environmental factors. So until we find the right balance, we'll keep expanding as well.
And what about the industry and healthcare sectors, because that makes up about 30%, so where would you see the biggest opportunities in the industry space?
So in the industry space, we're really focusing on kind of smart solutions, so smart utility solutions for district cities. Then we're looking at healthy living, healthy building solutions as well. So there, for example, we're in the cooling business, we're in the facade business, we're in the lighting business. So things like IoT integrated solutions for buildings. So how can we improve the energy efficiency of these buildings and make them healthy, which is obviously especially relevant today in this building. On the healthcare side, we're very strong on the pharma and equipment side, but we want to grow a lot still grow more on the pharma and on the services. The services side, we just started our first primary clinic, and we want to expand that fairly fast. And I think there's a strong trend that people are not only visiting large hospitals, but also looking to visit clinics closer by, as well as visiting universities.
So with so many diverse business areas, how do you try and find synergies across them?
So Synergies used to be a trading house. So we used to sell equipment across, and always sold kind of sell what the problems were, what infrastructure is being built, and what is equipment necessary and required for that, the services. And so it's not alien to us. We're very used to that actually. It's just we split off into different sectors.
So then let's talk about your father and your family in more detail. So under your father's leadership, Harold, Seagrid became one of the largest private power producers in Thailand. What would you say the biggest business lessons that he taught you?
He's somebody that always looks for partnership, to look for the best practice or best people out in the market, and somebody that never shied away from a challenge or trying out something new, and always knew how to put the different pieces together and to help the connections work well. Obviously, when you put a lot of partners together, there's a lot of interests that come together, a lot of mindsets, and he really has that skill. That's something that I try to learn from him, and I also see the opportunity in that, because obviously when the different partners come together, they're also in different areas. We can learn a huge deal from them. They elevate our standard as well, because a lot of them are international organizations. And that open-mindedness and flexibility of trying to understand the other person and come together, I think that's very valuable for us. It's been valuable for us in the past, and that's kind of how we function today.
And you've spoken about being a sort of guardian for B Group for the next generation. So what sort of footprint would you like to leave on the business?
Part of the success, or an important part of ours, is the culture, the values. I would really like to be a part of keeping that strong, making sure that we really bring that forward and being able to develop and evolve that. Another part is that obviously making it for the next generation is also something that they can understand or possibly be able to manage. As you said, we've grown a lot, we keep diversifying, keep adding new businesses, and it makes it more and more complex. So I would hope that I can pass it on also in a way that it makes it okay and easy for new generations to do. Also because it's a legacy or something that was built by others that you want to make sure that it keeps striving for it. So it's a sense of responsibility for everybody that put all that hard work in to make sure that that stays on into the future.
Social media giant Facebook and its Instagram and WhatsApp services have been hit by widespread outages. Facebook says it's aware some people are having trouble accessing the platforms, but hasn't said what's behind the problem. Well, let's speak to Ian Sher about this. He's the editor-at-large at the consumer tech site CNET, and is joining us from Maryland in the US. Very good to have you with us. Tell us about what this all is about. I mean, Facebook says some users, but this looks like a global outage. How widespread is it?
Well, it's hard to tell. I will say that when we're talking about Facebook, more than half the world's online population is using it every month. So, you know, a few users can be a lot of users. But this is a significant, look, these outages happen from time to time.
Right.
Sometimes they are the result of bad behavior, hacks or something. Other times it's someone who pushed the wrong button. And this time it seems like it may have been not a bad thing. It may have been someone pushed the wrong button, or
right,
some computer is misconfigured, and that'll get fixed at some point.
But this has been going on for over an hour now, which is long.
Yeah. It is long. And look, these things tend to be unusual because Facebook in particular really prides itself on working really well. You know, over the last, I'd say, 5-10 years, we've seen Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, all of them have been relatively stable. Before that, it was pretty normal for the internet to kind of go in and out and some websites not to work. You can look up the Twitter fail whale if you remember that period of internet history. So, you know, this stuff did happen, but it is unusual more so now. And so, yeah, having it out for an hour is definitely noteworthy.
And this is coming in a day after a whistleblower revealed that the company Facebook prioritized profit over public good. And we know that political pressure has been building on the company. We're not speculating, of course, here whether there's a link between that and what's happening today. But I'm wondering, you know, with all this bad publicity right now for Facebook and this political pressure, can the company withstand all this bad pressure and bad publicity? What do they have to do to change things?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that they are under really a lot of pressure from all over the place, right? Not just their critics and people like me in Silicon Valley, but also you've got the regulators in Washington, all over the world. And look, it's very clear that Facebook needs to really reckon with what they have done, both in terms of actually allowing bad behavior to continue happening on their platform, and how they haven't been honest and forthright with you and me and everybody else about how bad the situation is. And that is a really big problem.
How bad is the situation?
I mean, it's very clear that that harassment and the spread of disinformation, undermining democracy, all of these things have been happening on a wider scale than Facebook has told us about. We don't have access to any data that actually tells us. All we have are little slivers of information.
Right.
So it is a big, big problem. And the company has shown internally that they know that.
Right. That's what Whistleblower, of course, revealed in reports that we read about yesterday. You know, when you see all this you wonder, of course, if one company, Facebook, owning multiple major online platforms is a good idea. What can regulators do about it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been efforts inside of Washington to talk about whether or not Facebook should be forced to be broken up. You may remember that 20 years ago, that conversation was happening around Microsoft. And the way that turned out was that even though Microsoft was found to be a monopoly, all the government did was slap it on the wrist and allow it to continue being Microsoft. So I don't know exactly how far the U.S. government's going to be willing to go here, but I am curious to see whether this appetite for reigning in the tech industry will be any different from what it was a couple of decades ago.
Thank you so much for talking to us about this. Ian Sher from CNET joining us there from Maryland. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by Daniel Erickson, who is the CEO of Transparency International, to talk to us a little bit about what they are, what they mean. I mean, first of all, when we talk about, Daniel, the offshore structures, what do they mean, and how do these elite and wealthy manage to avoid taxes and avoid detection, essentially?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So these offshore structures and the whole industry that offers them, it's essentially a means to create anonymous companies that are very hard for anyone to trace who owns them, so that you, as the rich and famous, or most likely even corrupt or part of organized crime, can put your money in a structure that can't be tied back to you as an individual. This could be used for tax evasion, it could be used for money laundering, it could be used to pay bribes or other illicit fees to other parties. And these are entities that do not really benefit us normal individuals in society. It is for those who have too much money and dirty money that need to be cleaned.
And how do we decipher which is the too much money where people are just being greedy and tax avoiding, and those who actually need to get rid of some hot money?
Well, this is the case. I've heard about the term of ethical tax evasion that has been coined as part of this story. I'd say that there's really no good reason for why to have this. If you're trying to avoid $500,000 on your taxes, I think that's not something that society should accept. Even less so if you're trying to launder millions, tens of millions, that you gain through bribes or contracts that have been corrupted in Africa or elsewhere.
I mean, this is stellar work from those journalists. It's taken around 18 months to 67 million documents. But is there safety in numbers? Because there's so much detail and there are so many people named. You kind of think that, well, nobody's really going to have any sort of justice here.
Well, there needs to be accountability. There needs to be enforcement. There are laws around that says that these things are not allowed. And it's up to the enforcement agencies around the world to ensure that these individuals are held accountable that are mentioned in the papers. Yes, the numbers are great, but there's also technologies available these days to sift through all of this information and come to facts to find where the money goes and for what reason.
Well, the earlier tranche was in 2016, the Panama Papers. So what materialized in terms of going after people who were engaging in tax evasion from that?
Well, the world has learned a lot. And if you look near us, the European Union has introduced some laws that have made it better, more positive for us, but we still have a lot to learn and act on. And there's areas where there's a lot left to do, like in the middle of Europe, in Switzerland, where I'd argue that the whole industry of the neighbors, those who actually earn money from helping individuals who go at it like this, the lawyers, the accountants, the bankers, still are not sufficiently regulated at all.
Hi, I'm Emre Yildirim, a PhD student at the University of Manchester studying materials for nuclear It is Friday the 1st of October and this is your Fusion News Update. Today's stories include 1. A-Rod and Law back Fusion Power startup in funding round. 2. Tokamak Energy develops new magnet protection technology. 3. Fusion Power Plant test facility opens in South Yorkshire. 4. Rolls-Royce's new plan to mine on the moon. 5. Researchers simulate new compact power plant concept. And there are some bonus for you at the end here. 1. A-Rod and Law back Fusion Power startup in funding round. Ex-baseballer Alex Rodriguez is backing a new fusion startup coming out of Germany called Focused Energy. The company has raised $15 million in seed funding and has a plan to have a working gigawatt scale plant in the 2030s. They are working on harnessing inertial fusion, which uses laser beams to start a fusion reaction. This is further evidence of the growing investment in the fusion energy market, with $2 billion having already flooded into fusion startups. Now another player in the game is a super exciting concept, All of Us. 2. Tokamak Energy develops new magnet protection technology. UK fusion company Tokamak Energy has announced that they've developed a new magnet protection system which enhances the commercial viability of nuclear fusion power plants. Now, in their recent set of tests, they managed to demonstrate this technology which enabled the scaling up of their high-temperature superconductors. These high-temperature superconductors vastly outperform the classic magnet technologies, even the superconducting ones. Tokamak fusion reactors use magnets to contain and isolate a plasma so that it can reach the high temperatures at which fusion occurs. High magnetic fields are necessary for tokamaks to contain the superheated fuel. And high magnetic fields enable a smaller tokamak. High-temperature superconductors can create these much stronger magnetic fields, and so are important for commercial fusion power. The new technology, known as partial insulation, allows the magnets to be built and operated at power plant size, and provides a simpler alternative to traditional superconducting magnet protection systems. Tokamak Energy CEO Chris Kessel said, "For the first time, this latest test gives fusion developers an option for a new design of superconducting magnet that will be resistant to damage, reducing the cost and complexity of damage mitigation systems and the threat of downtime." 3. Fusion Power Plant test facility opens in South Yorkshire. Now there's more news coming from the UK nuclear fusion sector, and this is with the announcement of the UK EAEA's new fusion test facility, and this is based in the south of Yorkshire. And this new test facility has something really cool in there called the Chimera. Now, this is a facility that's going to enable the testing of new fusion components and new fusion components in new environments. These kind of environments are going to be things like thermal cyclic loading and high heat loads, along with putting them in high magnetic fields, all under vacuum. And this is a first for a lot of new fusion technology. Damon Johnson, UK AEA's Head of Operations, Fusion Technology Business Unit, and Head of the Fusion Technology Facility, said, "Chimera is a unique world-first facility in which we will be able to simulate the extreme conditions within a fusion power plant, but without any nuclear reactions. This will enable a step change in our ability to test components for all UK and international fusion research programs. It therefore represents a hugely important national capability, enabling industry in the UK and internationally to design and eventually qualify components for future commercial fusion power plants." Now the money for this came from the government and also local council funding. And these kind of new test facilities are absolutely vital on our way to commercial fusion energy. So this is definitely a facility that we're going to hear news from in the future, and probably even on this channel. 4. Rolls-Royce's new plan to mine on the moon. Now, to space for this one, or at least our closest rocks. So Rolls-Royce have announced a plan that they're looking at making a micro-nuclear reactor in order to mine on the moon. Now, with renewed interest in space exploration for the likes of Jeff Bezos and Virgin Galactic, etc., Rolls-Royce are looking to take advantage of a lot of this stuff too. And that is going to be for mining materials and precious metals that are super rare here on Earth. While the type of nuclear power is not clear, mining would enable the extraction of helium-3, a rare resource here on Earth, but in plentiful supply on the moon. Helium-3 can be used to fusion power plants aneutronically, meaning the reaction doesn't produce neutrons. This would result in less activation of surrounding materials, and it also releases more energy per reaction than deuterium-tritium fusion. While difficult, this represents a new way of looking at resources here on Earth with the ability to unlock plentiful supplies elsewhere. Now, it doesn't mean this couldn't happen tomorrow, but the fact that this is happening enables everyone to have a different outlook in the fusion energy sector, but in also other technology sectors on where we get our materials from. 5. Researchers simulate new compact power plant concept. Now for some academic work that's caught the eye of the press. Now this was published on phys.org, but it was based on some work done in the journal entitled Nuclear Fusion. Now in this work, US Department of Energy researchers outlined how they modeled entire tokamak with state-of-the-art physics models. Specifically, they identified careful shaping of the plasma geometry that would allow for the suppression of turbulent eddies in the device that cause massive heat loss and are a key barrier to sustaining lengthy fusion reactions. The work could greatly reduce the need for expensive current drive systems that sap a fusion plant's potential electric power output, and also enables a stationary, always-on configuration. This could be a key factor in the US's aggressive plan to bring fusion power to the grid, a plan that we're all really excited about, and you definitely should be too. Now, let's look at the bonus at the end. A helpful article for anyone who's missed the key milestones we have covered here on the channel. Singularity Hub published a list of recent fusion breakthroughs, maybe one to pass over to anyone wanting an update on the field. That's everything for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more from us, please check out our Fusion News Extra podcast, in which we do some deep dives on these stories that we're chatting about today. Now, please remember to like and subscribe, check out the podcast, and check out all the links in the description below. I'll see you next time.
Damien, we had Jeff Curry on. He intimated you could see 90. At what point do you want to re-rate your base case to something like 90?
Well, our base case is actually now $90 for the end of this year for Brent. What we've seen just the last couple months point to a market entrenched in a large deficit. The Delta wave was a smaller hit to oil demand, and now the gas situation is actually creating upside risk to oil demand, and Iran negotiations are not going anywhere. So we are heading for a period of low inventories. You mentioned price at their highest in 7 years. Our inventories are about to fall to their lowest in 10 years. And in our view, that requires another leg higher. So, the OPEC meeting just completed, and for us very much sets the stage for another meaningful leg higher.
When is OPEC going to come under pressure from Washington, D.C. to do more? Gas prices are rising, and I'm talking about at the forecourt. The U.S. consumer is going to feel that fairly quickly. So, the White House apparently was in contact, but didn't stress for OPEC to ramp up output at this meeting. There are maybe a couple of reasons for that. First of all, the acute shortage today is in gas, natural gas, not gasoline. So that's probably the most pressing issue. Second, adjusted for the overall level of income, gasoline prices are not as expensive as they were over the past decade at times. And third, OPEC is gradually ramping up. I think the pressure might be more will intensify, and our forecast is right now at price fluctuation $9 with upside risk. So, I think that's something that could still play out. But as you think about the market for the next 6 months, this deficit, which is already the longest on record in the oil market, will persist. And even if OPEC did a lot more, that's at the mercy of its spare capacity. So this is just an outright bullish outcome. We just need more investment in oil production here.
So, before we get to the supply response, there's one more on the demand. Saudi Aramco in that OPEC meeting said that the spike in gas prices has increased demand for oil by about 500,000 barrels of oil a day. That's a lot of gas to oil switching. It's not that easy in every refinery, etc., or every pipeline. What does your models notice in terms of what that switching actually is?
Our estimate actually isn't far. We're at 650,000 barrels per day. Now, keep in mind, we have a high stock of power plants that could run on oil. That was one of the incumbent fuels just 20 years ago. That switching can happen, and we see it every winter. Towards the end of winter, when you're running out of gas, you will see those spikes in oil burn. So, are we seeing it now? Yeah, if you look at Pakistan, Bangladesh, even Singapore fuel oil inventories, that's definitely pointing to substitution. Europe has less ability to do so, but on a global basis, we could easily do at times maybe 1, even 2 million barrels per day during a very cold wave. The one main issue for the gas market, that's not sustainable. What I mean by that, those power plants are peakers. They ramp up for a few days and turn it off again. And so that won't allow oil to really solve the gas shortage, although from an oil market perspective, it suddenly becomes an upside business demand.
Damien, you talk about Europe not having the ability to make that switch so easily. At the moment, there's scarcity in Europe, prices are high. What about actual shortages? Is that where we're heading? How cold does it need to get for that to happen?
It's a real risk, right? Keep in mind, we're in October, winter hasn't started, and we have the lowest level of gas inventory. And so when we run normal weather distribution, you end up with a decent share of outcomes where you truly hit shortages by February, March. So that's what the market is calling for. Again, no blackouts needed now, but you still have to be disciplined investment and diversifying. So what's happening? Well, mentioned gas to oil substitution. We're through that price threshold. The second step now is pushing some industries in Europe, manufacturing, fertilizers, at the margin of a global competitiveness perspective, which would reduce their consumption of gas. That's where prices are. Now, if it's a mild winter, we're okay, but again, you take a 1 standard deviation colder winter, and we truly have a problem. So nothing is resolved yet for Europe. And I think that's the key to keep in mind here.
So when you talk about your base case being 90 now, what is your upside risk? Are we talking 100? Are we talking over?
So keep in mind, in oil, unlike gas, we still have that spare capacity. Now the real bullish outcome for any commodity market is your short-term shortage, right? If you don't have the supply, like we're seeing in China now, you have to destroy demand. That's blackout. And I know we're not there yet, right? And again, I think of the energy complex, it's the laggard, but
Est-ce que Speed est now?
we're getting closer, and it's easy to envision, whether it's diesel, for example, fuel oil, where you're really boosting demand now to have those shortages. And then yes, 100 is conceivable, above $100 is conceivable. OPEC does respond, right? They don't want this economic shortage from an oil perspective, reducing economic growth. But, as we just learned today, it's not going to be immediate, and even when they decide, it's at least a month to fail. So I think that's the real risk that we see. Again, gas much more explosive, we're at that critical juncture. Oil could have been.
Damien, I've heard energy CEO, I'm talking about Shell here, after energy CEO, telling me that they are going to be disciplined. They're not going to bring extra capacity back on. They're here for the shareholders. They're not here to pump more and more and more. At 90, at 100, at 110, how disciplined do you think they're going to be?
That's a key question. Is really the cost inflation, right? When the shale producers come back to ramp up, well, service companies will be fewer and they'll have a lot more pricing power. So what could be critical to shale is really that step higher in cost in coming years.
Understanding the feasibility of a fish farming happening of more than 3 nautical miles out to sea will be investigated.
Well, we are committed to growing the aquaculture sector. And we want to partner with industry to make sure they can find environments in which to do it. The Commonwealth Zone is an area where they can do it, and if we can, we will.
Talking about sending aquaculture offshore is in no way managing the issues in Tasmania. The Tasmanian government has previously announced it would develop a new 10-year salmon plan, with research focused on moving fish farms further offshore and also onto land. Technology that's used to stop farm runoff onto the Great Barrier Reef is now being trialled on the New South Wales and the North Coast. The region produces more blueberries than anywhere else in the country, and it's also home to the state's oldest marine park. It's hoped the innovation will help strike a healthy balance between farming and the environment. Horticulture is big business on the Coast Coast, But scientists say fertiliser pollution is threatening the environment.
We found one of the highest nitrate loads coming off those farmland on the east coast of Australia.
Nitrates are in fertilisers, which are good for crops, but harmful for water quality and marine life.
Fertiliser and elevated nutrient levels can cause algal blooms, which can reduce the levels of oxygen available to fish and animals.
Researchers trialled a system called a bioreactor on farms to catch excess runoff before it enters waterways. The bioreactor acts as a home for small bugs in the soil to heat fertilisers.
What we're doing is providing them and then they convert that into locally done oxygen gas.
In certain conditions, it was shown to reduce runoff by up to 85%.
It looks like bioreactors can be one tool that farmers can use to help reduce the nutrients that might be leaving their farms and entering our waterways, which is really exciting.
Researchers plan to trial more bioreactors across the coast. Once the design can be adapted for different types of produce, it's hoped they can become a common fixture on farms. But farmers say the focus should turn to fertiliser management.
I can say the bioreactor is doing a good job, but we need to do some work in the nutrient side of things.
But bioreactors aren't the main solution.
We always try and talk about the fact that this is not a silver bullet. There are a number of things that have to happen on farms to improve nutrient management.
Efforts to strike a healthy balance between farming, community and the environment. Claudia Jambor, ABC News, Coffs Harbour.
Tasmania's west coast is now home to some of the most remote and challenging mountain biking trails in the country. But the region's doctors are apprehensive about Queenstown's new adventure tourism, saying hospitals aren't equipped to deal with the predicted spike in the city's
A mountain strip there by Morrigan. Now home to 35 kilometres of mountain biking trails in a move that's breathing new life in
Subscribe to the channel. To the bell icon, you will be notified of Kalkine's latest videos. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sage for Kalkine Media, and today we're going to bring to you 5 ASX-listed resource stocks for budget investment. The global resource sector has cycled through the lows in the early pandemic and later gained momentum to break the barriers, reaching a multi-year high level. And the price of almost every commodity jumped significantly on the back of a solid recovery from the slumps of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, China's latest curbs on steel and aluminium production have weighted down prices of the base metals. And the Asian superpower intends to limit greenhouse emissions in an effort to meet its ambitious carbon neutrality goals. At the same time, a strong economic recovery has pushed down demand for gold and precious metals, weighing down their prices. However, the ongoing crude oil supply disruptions in the US Gulf Coast have buoyed oil prices to nearly 3-year highs. On Wednesday, the S&P ASX 200 Resource Index reached 4,679 points. However, commodity prices have grown significantly and there are ample opportunities for investment. Against this backdrop, let's now take a look at 5 ASX-listed cheap resource stocks which can be explored for budget investment. Incorporated in 2005, Red Hill Iron, an iron ore player that holds and operates its flagship Pannawonica Channel Iron Project and the Red Hill Iron Ore joint venture. The company is engaged in exploration of gold, iron ore and other base metals. Based in Perth, Australia, Queensland Pacific Metals is engaged in the exploration and development of battery metals including alumina, cobalt and nickel. The company holds and operates its flagship Townsville Energy Chemicals Hub. Core Lithium is primarily engaged in the exploration and production of lithium in the Northern Territory and South Australia, and the company holds and operates the Finniss Lithium Project located in the Northern Territory. Elevate Uranium is a uranium-focused company that holds significant projects in Namibia and Australia. The company is engaged in discoveries through energetic exploration programs, and shares of the company have grown significantly due to the current surge in global uranium prices. Australia-based Greenvale Mining is a mineral exploration company that focuses on oil shales, and the company was listed on the ASX in 1971. The company holds and operates the Georgina Basin high-grade iron programs, and shares of the company have grown significantly due to the current surge in global uranium prices. Australia-based Greenvale Mining is a mineral exploration company that focuses on oil shales, and the company was listed on the ASX in 1971. The company holds and operates the Georgina Basin high-grade iron oxide copper-gold project and the Alpha Torbanite project located in Australia. The resource sector has experienced major transformations with rising demands for critical metals from new avenues, such as renewable power and electric mobility. ASX holds some of the highly prospective resource stocks, which may hold potential to create wealth for its shareholders. And if you like this information, please like, share, comment on the video below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon, and you'll be notified of our latest videos. But for more info and regular updates, please do head to the website. It's calkinemedia.com, and this is Sage from Calkine Media.
Shell game exposed by LuxLeaks, the Panama Papers, and other data dumps that Canadian shimmers high and mighty who stash their cash far from prying eyes. What's new since last time? Well, you might say COVID. The gap between the haves and have-nots of this world went into overdrive the past 18 months, with the winners of the planet's digital acceleration raking in record.
Billionaires and criminals.
Filmmakers, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Welcome as well to Nathalie Janson. Economist state will be in the French capital of the OECD on Tuesday. It's the home of the dollar, imposing banking transparency on the rest of the planet, where Washington agrees with reciprocity open its books, particularly in tax havens such as Delaware, Nevada, South Dakota. Beyond the U.S., the OECD estimates the overall sums stashed offshore at $11.3 trillion. What damage does that do to the global economy? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if these Pandora Papers will change the conversation. And one of those who's been poring over the data for the past 8 months, investigative reporter Ricky Alman, executive producer at documentary filmmaker. Thank you. Welcome as well to Nathalie Janson, economist, associate professor at the Maine Business School. How are you? Hi. And with us as well, crypto-based contributing editor, of course, we're the author of Metal Men, Mars Rich, and the $10 billion scam.
Go ahead.
In the early 80s, which is the origin story of what we're talking about tonight. So we'll ask you if the song remains the same in a moment. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Journalists painstaking to connecting those dots for some 1,000 offshore companies, 236 high-level politicians and public officials so far, including 35 current and former world leaders. Marius Sokos has more.
is one of the largest ever global media investigations involving more than 600 journalists who've analysed some 11.9 million financial documents. The leaked records implicate hundreds of world leaders, politicians, billionaires, celebrities, religious leaders and drug dealers. For the past 25 years, they've been using offshore accounts to hide their investments in luxury properties, yachts and other valuable assets, collectively worth trillions of dollars. The report was released by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists.
We have emails, passport copies, bank statements that show how presidents, kings, princesses, billionaires and criminals hide and move money.
Among the more than 330 current and former politicians identified as beneficiaries of the offshore accounts are Jordan's King Abdullah II, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, and the Czech Republic's Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, who denied any wrongdoing on Sunday.
České banky byly zdaněné, byly to moje peníze a vrátili se do české banky.
Many of the secret accounts were designed to evade or avoid taxes. Tony Blair, who has been a vocal critic of tax loopholes, is shown to have been legally avoiding the payment of stamp duty on a multi-million-pound property in London. The Pandora Papers are the latest in a series of mass leaks of financial documents, including the 2016 Panama Papers, which led to the resignation of Iceland's leader at the time and set the stage for the ousting of Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif.
So the Panama Papers did get results 5 years ago. German, what are you expecting from the Pandora Papers?
I believe there's some kind of attention from the public opinion. This time there are 150 media organizations, 600 journalists throughout the world work on those 11.9 million documents as your reporter was referring to. Gerard Ryle, who heads the ICIJ, so the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Consortium seems like it's a big multinational company. It's more or less like an NGO, regrouping dedicated journalists to work in, not in disguise, but in total confidentiality for many months. And Gerard Ryle is saying the Panama Papers are like the Panama Papers on steroids, because there are many more people.
Now you worked on the Panama Papers, and we'll ask you in a second about the documentary you worked on. Did you feel like it was on steroids yourself?
This time, yes.
Is that your personal feeling?
Yes, definitely. Because of the massive documents, 11.9 million documents. It's extremely complicated because they have, the ICIJ had technicians, computer experts to work on special software to design for this leak to actually have a search engine, very powerful search engine, so that journalists from 150 countries could actually really look into the documents and start investigating.
So partner station France 2 streaming your documentary as of this Monday, and it concerns the former finance minister of France, head of the International Monetary Fund, Dominique Strauss-Kahn.
Yes, there are 600 French citizens in the documents, and Dominique Strauss-Kahn, former IMF director, he's very well known in France. As your viewers might remember, he was the French socialist minister of economics. So these pictures were filmed in New York, obviously after the Sofitel affair, which definitely got him out of the political scene, and there was a long trial in New York with these pictures, with three major reporters at our station. They were able to see that Dominique Strauss-Kahn today, who we kind of thought was happy, maybe not happy, but at least a quiet retired man, is leading his own company, and is counseling many heads of states around the world and evading his taxes in France by going to Morocco first and then
avoiding or evading, because that's an important.
That is the debate. That is the debate. That is the debate. I believe citizens will say evading. Sometimes it's quite legal, and we discovered that Dominique Strauss-Kahn, before becoming a Moroccan citizen, should pay some taxes in France on the revenue that he has.
Nathalie Janson, when I wore younger man's clothes, I covered the finance ministry, and I remember interviewing Dominique Strauss-Kahn, heartfeltly talking about clamping down on tax rates. This was in the late 1990s, quarter century ago. perception of this would be in the public image.
For sure. Anyway, anyone at the government won't say that we agree with the tax report because anyway, taxes that is not coming into for the government. So for sure, when you are a public official, you will not say that you are in favor of tax reforms in the budget because you're looking at sending money to taxpayers to avoid paying the tax because you are using your immediate revenue.
But does it surprise you this way?
No, that's always existed and we will survive, but we change the way we are. As a grand control, we need to send to the news and right now that we have different taxation that are higher than others with some tax rate. You have a benefit of having tax hikes. This is the reason, it's because you have different taxation and some with higher tax rate than others.
Well, I'm not averse to treating Dominique Strauss-Kahn like a teen girl murder suspect on Law and Order, but you better be damn well sure, and I mean damn well sure, that he was evading taxes in France and at that time was not a tax resident of Morocco. Because if he was, then he was complying with the law and would not have to, in broad brushstrokes, be paying any tax on any income coming into France.
This is where it gets confusing, isn't it?
No,
Because on the one hand,
no, it's not confusing.
On one hand,
it's clear. It's clear.
What you have to say report and
Well, no, was Dominique Strauss-Kahn?
Have you seen our story? I haven't seen our story yet.
Well,
It's been only a
was
year,
he
right?
residing in France during the time?
At the beginning, the answer is yes. And then as you will see in our long investigation, along with the moon, the state newspaper and France, you will see that he himself was a key asset with the Moroccans to set up a tax-haven city in Casablanca. And that he really designed and organized with his lawyers exactly how Morocco could attract some investors who would not pay their taxes.
Was it legal?
It's a public.
Well, was it legal? I'm not a priest, maybe you are. Was it moral? Probably not. Was it legal under Moroccan law? That's the question.
It was legal under the Moroccan law that he helped design.
Okay.
And he is, you know that he is a Moroccan citizen, but before that he was a French citizen and making a lot of money, which is fine. He makes a lot of money here. He has to pay taxes in the country where he was.
Well, let me ask you the question this way, Buchanan. You have former leaders who, when they're out of power, monetize their investment. We've seen it with former Dutch prime ministers, with former U.S. presidents, with former British prime ministers. How is this different from those cases?
Well, it's a question of morality. I have no intention of dictating Mr. Strauss-Kahn's conduct, but being a former French minister of economy, being a former IMF director, being a former member of the Socialist Party, one would expect that he would do his business anywhere as he pleases in the world, and he can give speeches and be a counselor. But one would expect that if he stays in France
then with all
quite a long time, then he would pay his taxes in France.
With all due respect, you're naive.
No, we're not naive. We're investigating on some real solid
because what he did, whether you like it, the morals of it or not, was legal. And if he did this while he was no longer a tax resident of France, it was in all likelihood legal in France. If he was making money in France and offshoring it as a legal tax resident,
surely you see the richness of it coming from the man who, to me, called out tax havens and tax
you cannot
loopholes.
prosecute irony in a court of law. And that's what Strauss-Kahn and all these other lawyers were saying. I applaud the work he did. But let me tell you, I'm in all likelihood the only person in this room who's actually set up an offshore tax shelter on numerous occasions when I went undercover for a year as a commodity trader to write my book. Most recently, during the Panama Papers situation, when we were doing a TV report out of Panama, I know how it's done. I've done it. I know all the bells and whistles. I know what they look for. And quite frankly, if Dominique Strauss-Kahn was making money while living in France and offshoring, then the French government should go after him full tilt boogie for that time frame.
Well, that is for the French government to decide, and since unfortunately you have not been able to discuss that much, but you will agree that I'd be happy to debate with you in the upcoming weeks after Morocco, when he worked and lived in Morocco and had designed this tax shelter city. Then it became then he had to pay taxes in Morocco, and then he moved to close to Dubai in a small Emirates called RAK, R-A-K, and we demonstrate in our documentary that he's not paying any taxes also. So it's a long 90-minute investigation.
I just have to ask, does he have to pay taxes under the laws of that particular member of the UAE?
No.
Okay.
So, meaning, and this is the whole moral debate we have here, and this is why I'm not going on political side, I'm just going on a citizen, public opinion needs to put more pressure on the politicians to avoid people to be able to do exactly what you did somehow 20 years ago.
I agree
it's still
with
extremely
your moral
simple.
stance is correct. I agree with it, okay? But legally, you're not going to win in any court.
All right, just before we go to the break, I want to just look up one other example, which you as a former Moscow bureau chief would be, want your reaction to it. Nowhere does Vladimir Putin directly appear as the beneficiary of an offshore account in the Pandora Papers, but many in his close entourage, including a certain Svetlana Krigovonik, whose rags
their
to
COVID
riches
outbreaks, including China, Japan and New Zealand. Australia, as expected, won't be included for now until it deals with its own COVID situation. Indonesia says international visitors will include people on business visas and returning expats, as well as some tourists. All will have to quarantine on arrival for 8 days. Officials say the island's reopening will be done in stages to ensure Indonesia is well prepared.
Australian iron ore giant Rio Tinto continued to secretly trade with the Chinese billionaire who admitted to bribing one of their former executives. Revelations come as part of a massive global leak called the Pandora Papers, as Elise Worthington reports.
The leaked documents reveal Chinese steel billionaire Du Shuanghua set up a series of offshore companies and trusts to move his wealth after he was investigated by Chinese authorities over the Rio Tinto case. In 2010, Du admitted to bribing a former Rio Tinto executive with $9 million. The employee was jailed on corruption and stealing commercial secrets charges. Du was never charged and went on to make billions. Documents reveal Du is behind the Singapore company Bright Ruby, which Rio continued to trade with for years after the corruption admission. Rio Tinto declined to comment.
There's been a massive global outage affecting Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram. Tracking sites show the world's most popular social media and messaging services are down across Sydney, Washington, Paris, London and other cities. To sport, the head of Formula One wants full crowds at all races next year, including the Australian Grand Prix. The 2022 calendar will be announced this week. Australia set to lose its traditional opening round slot in a shake-up that will also see more sprint races. F1 head Stefano Domenicali has told Sky, sport will respect local laws, but crowds are important.
What has been incredibly important.
So that means that the need of getting back to race emotions.
The England and Wales Cricket Board has publicly raised the prospect of the Ashes being cancelled as it prepares to meet this week to decide the fate of the English tour. Players have been reluctant to travel and have concerns with quarantine and biosecurity requirements being imposed by Australian governments. ABC News.
Thank you very much, Helen. It's Tuesday, the 5th of October.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Luxury real estate in Monaco. Files do not indicate where she got the money to pay for the home that cost $4.1 million in 2003. It's probably worth far more today. The Pandora Files, this is the Washington Post reporting, saying it provides the first evidence that her holdings have extended beyond Russia's borders. What's interesting about this story, Craig, is does it inform how you see Russia since Vladimir Putin took over in 2000? This was early in his mandate, and already there were people in his close entourage who were setting up accounts. Are they back?
Advertised level losses. S&P stood on 50, Nasdaq down 273, and that was the loser of the day. Nasdaq down 1.8%, S&P down 1.1%, Dow is down 0.8%. So the Nasdaq is down, more than double the Dow in percentage terms. So that was Spire. Spire just turned positive while I'm talking about it. It's now 7.11, up 1 penny on 2.7 million shares. So 1 penny gain on Spire.
It's called the quartermasters, and as you pointed out in the Panama papers, and we'll probably point out in the pumpkin spice latte.
Speech on Wednesday to announce some sort of initiative in this area?
I think the problem is when you have something like this, there's quite often a signal that comes out before a minister makes a speech or a decision publicly, and we haven't seen any signals on this. But I personally remain hopeful, as Andrew's just said, that we still have a little bit of a way to go, and perhaps there will be some accommodation made for those people around the edges that aren't necessarily, the working poor, as you can define them with the universal credit.
It's interesting, isn't it? This is not a sort of left versus right thing. There are people on, I would say, the real right of the Conservative Party who are expressing just the same interest as people on the hard left of the Labour Party.
Well, our electoral demographic has changed. 2019 completely redrew the political map, and therefore we can't have. And I think this throughout this conference is that we can't have the same dynamic that we've always had. We can't just be the party of business because we have these red wall constituencies that are dependent on us to think in a different way, and it is creating a bit of an intellectual difficulty which we haven't found a way to articulate properly yet.
Samantha Smith.
No, I very much agree with what Salma said. The voter demographic for Conservatives has completely shifted.